Hello, dear listener. This is the Right Here, Right Queer podcast. I'm Tess Carletta, and today we're bringing you a preview of my book, Kit and Basie. Now, usually when we do this, we give you the very first chapter so that you can test it out right from the beginning. But Kit and Basie is, at its roots, a story about grief, which means that the first few chapters are kind of a bummer. So instead, I'm going to be giving you Chapter 4, which is when the titular characters, Kit and Basie, meet for the first time. Now, when we pick up at this spot, the only thing that you need to know is that Basie's mother has passed away. He's immortal, so he's trying to leave town, but he hasn't quite been able to, and he has sold his house to a guy named Kit, and he's walked by and seen that Kit is having an estate sale to sell all of Basie's things.
Chapter 4. The only bright side to the Yeats family truck being stuck in Ontario was that Basie really liked to walk. Knowing Long Lily like the back of his hand, Basie knew just how long it would take him to arrive at the gas station on foot, where Ed Nugent filled his tank every Monday morning before driving to Snyder County to buy lumber. If he was lucky, there'd be room for Basie too. The stiff, uneven bed he'd made in the diner had stolen his sleep, making him wake up later than he had in mind. If he was going to make it before Ed hit the road, he'd have to take the route past Wellhead. The modification went against his own strict resolution to avoid Wellhead at all costs, under threat of... well, he hadn't come up with a punishment yet, but something lousy. It wasn't the view of the house itself he wanted to avoid. It was the sight of the things in the house that he could see from the road, the photographs on the wall, his mother's paintings, the Amish quilt folded over the couch. He still had a secret spare key. If he wanted them, which he didn't, he could go in, take the heirlooms before Kit Elliot threw them all away, and be gone before anyone knew he'd been there. The only problem was, Kit Elliot was already outside. A moving van swallowed half of him up, but he appeared out of the back with an armful of boxes a second later. From the road, Kit looked tall, though Basie had a feeling that they'd stand eye to eye up close. In the shade, his hair was the color of ground nutmeg, but melted into auburn gold when he stepped into the sun. Basie hated himself for it, because he could not explain why, but he understood what Louis had meant about Kit looking like he belonged at Wellhead. Maybe it was something about the way everything was just a little bit more vibrant where Kit stood. It made a traitorous part of Basie want to draw nearer. It was Kit's attire that stood out against the Maryland U-Haul. Brown dress pants, a striped button-down, and, good God, a tie. Dry dirt kicked up around his dress loafers, sullying the expensive leather with a typical Long Lily welcome. Unaware or unconcerned with the dust storm at his feet, Kit dropped the boxes on the front steps and snuck a peek inside the top. Basie appraised the grace with which the man moved, assured but gentle, like there was no cause in the world to rush. He wondered what sort of things a man like this brought with him when he moved, and if he'd play nice with all the things Basie had left behind. "Need a ride into town, Basie?" Basie practically jumped out of his skin. Jed Donlevy was just behind him, grinning like a long-tongued dog from the window of his bright truck, locally known as the Submarine for its beetle-like yellow hue. A wide grin showed off the cracked tooth he'd gotten from a bar fight last January. Basie knew Jed was otherwise harmless, but he still jolted. All at once, it occurred to Basie that if he had heard Jed, then... Kit was already looking at Basie, staring the way people look at lions in a zoo, hands in his pocket, a safe distance away in case the unknowable creature decided to lash out. Understanding lit his eyes, as if he was calculating with perfect accuracy just how long Basie had been standing there watching him. In short, Basie needed to get the hell out of there. Yeah, a ride would be great, thanks," he said. As soon as Basie slammed the truck door, Jed had questions about how he wanted to relocate some wires in his attic, but a bee's nest had built itself around them, and would Basie please help him because he was an electrician and good with bees? Basie probably answered. He wasn't sure. He couldn't remember, not when he was still watching Kit Elliot in the side mirror, not when Kit Elliot was still watching back. "Hey, since I've got you in the car," Jed began when they had reached town. "Jamie was asking me about getting the aluminum wires in his shop redone. I told him he'd probably have to run the copper himself, but since you're still around, think you could have a look at it yourself?" The truck chugged. Nose dipped a little too far into the intersection as they waited at a red light. Across the street, Ed Nugent was at the gas station pumping diesel into his pickup. If Basie hopped out of the submarine now, he could still catch Ed before he took off. He could still be out of Long Lily today. He just had to get out of the truck. The light flashed green, and the submarine rolled forward. "Jamie'll kill himself if he tries to do it. He never wears gloves," Basie said, knowing full well he was the intended audience of his own statement. He twisted in his seat to face Jed, the seatbelt cutting into his collarbone. "Might as well drop me off at his place." "You sure you got the time? Don't want to pester you if you're trying to hit the road." In the rearview mirror, Ed Nugent turned north up Main Street and disappeared over the hill. Basie heaved a sigh, weighty with the cab's stale scent of hay and mud. "No, I've got time. I'll be in town for a few more days." New plan, Basie thought. Spend the week making sure no one in Long Lily had any electrical issues in need of resolution, and try to catch Ed Nugent again next Monday. What was another 7 days avoiding Wellhead? When Basie resolved to his new plan, the townspeople saw an invitation, and the universe saw an opportunity to say, "Careful what you wish for," because for a week straight, he squatted into attics and ducked into basements, fixing every last electrical problem his neighbors in a 5-mile radius could come up with. The sheer volume of requests nearly outnumbered hours in the day, resigning Basie to work into the late evening. It kept him out of his damp squatting nook in Crane's Nest, and for that he could not be sour. Monday came just when Basie felt that he would surrender his last threads of sanity if he saw another wire or breaker panel. His things were packed, bundled up much messier than when he first arrived. All he had to do was zip the pack shut to finally head west and away when his phone gave a cheerful little ring. Jed started speaking before Basie could even say, "Hello, this is Basie." "Are you coming over or not, Basie? It's been a week." Basie leaned his forehead against the diner wall to keep from sighing. How Jed had known to call precisely when he did, Basie could not fathom. He could just tell Jed to call any of the neighboring electricians outside of town, that "I'm not the only shitting electrician in the state." But Della would turn over in her grave and haunt him for the rest of eternity if he talked to a Long Lily local that way. Yeah, Jed. I'm just packing up to walk over now. I'm nearby, so it won't be long." "Good, 'cause I've been living with bees in my attic for a week, and they're starting to get into the vents. Stung Elise just last night while she was sleeping." "Sorry, sir. I'll get them cleared out right away." Jed hung up, and Basie tapped the phone against his forehead. Bees. He'd forgotten there were bees. A whole nest of them, if he remembered correctly. The supplies in his tool belt wouldn't be enough. He needed his beekeeping suit and veil, which were... His heart dropped. They were in a storage box in his old yard. Damn it. Basie let his pack fall to the floor with a defeated thump and wrapped his tool belt around his waist. A deal was a deal. Wellhead came into view the way it always did, cresting over the hill, steeple eclipsing the sun. Basie slowed his pace as he passed the cottage, checking the flowers in the front yard to make sure they were still alive. He let his gaze wander through the window, peering in to see if his mother's paintings were still hung on the wall. They were, and to Basie's surprise, so were most of his baby pictures. Possibly Kit hadn't had a chance to properly unpack yet, but what did it matter? It was his house now. He could spend the next decade settling in if he wanted to. If he liked someone else's family pictures on the wall, Basie wasn't going to be the one to tell him it was odd. Basie kept walking. His objective was clear: get to the storage box, steal his bee suit, finish his very last task as Long Lily's electrician, and get the hell out of town. His shoulders relaxed when the storage crate was unlocked, giving him extra time to snatch his things and gain a few extra miles on the road. He just folded the suit under his arm when a voice behind him drawled, "What the hell are you doing?" For a blood-chilling moment, Basie thought the voice belonged to Kit. He nearly tripped over his own feet spinning around, an apology ready on his lips. His heart gave a few relieved punches when it was only Louis, hands on his hips, wearing his best "I'm a legal guardian and you better listen to me" face. "What's it look like? I'm getting my bee suit," stated Basie sensibly. "I didn't mean right this second, though I'm pretty sure this counts as stealing. I meant what are you doing here, in Long Lily? You were supposed to be gone days ago." Basie shifted the suit under his arm uncomfortably. "I missed my ride with Ed." "And today?" "Jed's got bees in his attic." Louis threw up his arms, eyes rolling so far into his head it had to have hurt. "Great day in the morning, Base. If you didn't want to leave Long Lily, you should have just said so. Now your house is sold and you don't have anywhere to be." "I do want to leave Long Lily," Basie insisted fiercely. "But apparently I didn't give our neighbors the 2-week notice they wanted, so I've been running all over town fixing every last flickering light this side of the Susquehanna River." It then occurred to Basie that perhaps it wasn't appropriate to start yelling outside someone's place of living, so he stuffed his free hand in his pocket and took a breath. "Is Kit home?" Louis stared at him hard for a long moment. "No, I don't know where he's at, and you're damn lucky he's not here either, because I wouldn't help you explain this to him if he was." Basie waited for the relief to set in, but his nerves kept racing, electrified by something he could not put a name to. He shifted his weight. "What's he like?" "Well-mannered, quiet, polite," Louis answered, looking Basie up and down. "Whatever the opposite of reckless is, why?" "Can't a man be curious?" "Not if he's sworn it off like a Lenten sacrifice." Basie squinted up at the sun so Louis couldn't see his face, which would surely betray the jumble of confusing thoughts that were turning his head into a swamp. He might not have known what he was feeling, but Louis always had a habit of guessing just what Basie was ignoring inside and calling him out on it. "How's this for a Lenten sacrifice? I'm giving up Long Lily starting tomorrow. You can come see me off in the morning if you want." "My goodbye gift to you will be pretending like I actually believe you. Be sure to write when you're gone, oh headstrong youth. Don't get swept up in those western winds." Basie didn't know how to get tangled up in the winds, but he wanted to. Possibly he could never be the sort to get the air kicked up beneath him, to let chance sail him to unknown places. All he knew were age-old roots, the kind that weren't easily tugged from their home soil. Perhaps this was why, in the midst of bees and wires, Basie asked Jed if the dollar store on the corner still had flickering lights over the bread aisle, or why he walked past Wellhead on the way back to the Forest Diner to see if Kit would be standing outside. He wasn't. It wasn't a healthy routine, but Basie was powerless to change it. In the days after his bee suit heist, it went like this. Wake up, empty the rain buckets by the rusty coffee machine, walk past Wellhead on the way into Long Lily for one odd electricity fix or another, confirm that the unkillable irises on the side of the house were still alive, check to see if Kit was visible from the road, not dwell on the disappointment when he wasn't, untangle wires, let his neighbors feed him homemade meals as appreciation for his help, go back to Crane's Nest. Rinse, repeat. Rinse, repeat. If you asked Basie how long he'd been doing this, he'd lie. If you asked Louis Simon how long Basie'd been doing this, he'd tell you it'd been 17 days. Things changed the morning Kit Elliot put out a sign that said in pointy cursive, "Estate sale, this way, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Basie noticed the sign from his usual spot up the road where he watched the house. He allowed himself a few extra moments to stand there, a little dumbfounded, hidden out of sight by the cars in the driveway. Since he promised to start doing Immortality right, he should have continued up the road toward the grocery store and pretended that he hadn't seen anything. But at this rate, Basie was only doing Immortality marginally better than he had been when he lived at Wellhead, which was to say, his progress was piss-poor at best. So he supposed one more lapse in judgment wasn't the end of the world. Barely looking both ways, Basie jogged across the street and over the Wellhead property line. He took one step into Wellhead and regretted it immediately. Kit Elliot had turned his childhood home into a goddamn Walmart. Okay, that wasn't exactly fair, but it felt like it. In reality, all Kit had done was mark the odds and ends around the house with neon price stickers. He hadn't moved anything from where Basie had left it when he fled the cottage, but made things more open. Drawers were pulled out to reveal Della's stamp collection from her scrapbooking days. Her salt and pepper shaker collection from the 20s filled the bureau top. The closet door was propped aside so buyers could browse her old coat collection. Basie bumped shoulders with familiar faces as they ambled through the tiny cottage. He didn't look up to see if they'd reacted to his presence there. It was too much. All his childhood, exactly how he remembered it, now just up for sale. "Anything good in that shed out back? The one by the bees?" someone asked. "I imagine there might be, with all the treasures inside the house," came the reply. Basie looked up from a box of his mother's bandanas to find Kit Elliot counting change in a cash box. He wore one of Della's baking aprons, having stuffed the pockets with pens and more stickers. Red curls poked into his eye, so he flicked his head back and nudged around the pennies in his palms. "Don't you know what's back there yet?" the woman paying pressed. Kit politely shook his head, then handed the lady her change. The key in Basie's pocket felt like a sack of stones. "Thanks for stopping by," Kit said, leaving no room for any more questions. The woman didn't seem to care. "I bet there's good gardening supplies back there. I'd be interested if you were willing to take a look." "You don't want anything from inside there," cut in Louis Simon. Basie ducked behind a corner, knowing that if Louis saw him here, he'd never hear the end of it. "Basie didn't take very good care of his tools. It's just a bunch of old rakes and rusty nails, not worth busting the lock over." Basie frowned. Was Louis covering for him or insulting him? Either way, the lady wasn't buying it. "That doesn't sound like him. He loved his mother's things." "Really? It's a wonder, then, that he left so many of her belongings here," Kit cut in, though not unkindly. It sounded to Basie like the man was genuinely curious, which made it worse. "Maybe he's not the boy we thought he was," conceded the woman, who apparently knew all about him, without Basie having a first name to match to her face. He had enough of this. Not caring who he bumped into, he stumbled toward the front door, knocking into a rack of his hats. Coming here was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake. Sure, it was easy to plan to do the right thing, but the actual execution of said right thing was 1,000 times harder, and Basie was only one single, imperfect person, a small-town guy. All right, an immortal small-town guy. You'd think that in all 7 decades of his infinite wisdom, he'd know better than to... Oh. Basie's eyes fell on a cluster of ceramic pie plates hanging on the wall, and all at once, he couldn't move. Well, shit, he thought. No matter what his neighbors said, he didn't care about anything in this house. Not the stamps, not the bandanas, or the weird salt and pepper shakers. But these were different. There were 5 altogether, 1 for each decade he didn't age. There weren't pie plates for the first 2 decades of his existence, because Della didn't usually reward something as simple and easy as aging. She had wanted something practical to commemorate the occasion of Basie's immortality, something that captured exactly where they'd been in that moment in time, without taking up space they didn't have. So she painted flowers on the pie plates, food-safe glaze bouquets that were exact replicas of whatever flowers Della had picked out for his birthday that year. The most recent plate, the one Della had painted earlier that spring because they'd almost forgotten the 5th decade, was a bouquet of sunflowers. He wanted them. "Mr. Elliot," Basie called out behind him. Kit, who'd been politely laughing at some joke the Catholic priest was telling him, looked up and froze. If he recognized Basie as the man who had stared at him from the street, or even from the pictures on his walls, Basie couldn't tell. "How much for the pie plates?" Kit's eyes traveled behind Basie, lingering on the stoneware for a long second. "Oh, sorry, those aren't for sale," replied Kit. His voice was as smooth as raindrops down a window pane. Basie couldn't quite comprehend that he'd been told no. He straightened his back, a scowl on his face. "And why not?" It was Kit's turn to straighten up. "Because I like to bake, and they're high-quality pie tins." "I could pay you for even better pie tins." "That's very generous, but I'm afraid I have to decline." Basie dug the toe of his boot into the carpet, gritting his teeth. He'd sold this house for a mere fraction of what it was worth, left all his earthly belongings behind, and didn't ask for a single thing in return. Who was Kit Elliot to come in and decide that Basie could not have the one thing he wanted of his mother's? Maybe this was what Louis had meant when he practically begged Basie to take some of his mother's things. At the time, though, it seemed like if he couldn't have all of his mother, he didn't want the inconsequential pieces of her either. As if reading the expression on Basie's face, Kit offered an apologetic smile and said, "I'm sorry." It was the wrong thing to say. "You know what I think?" Basie snapped. Kit's face dropped, as if he'd been slapped, like he already knew what was coming. "I think you're not sorry at all. I think you bought this house because it was cheap and you knew you could sell all the things inside without any regard for their value to anyone else." Kit drew in a quiet, controlled sigh. "You're entitled to that opinion, certainly." Basie scoffed, but Kit pressed on patiently. "You may not know, but the person who owned this house before me left all his belongings behind. It would have been easier to just throw everything away, but out of respect for the previous homeowner, I didn't want to be so thoughtless with his or his late mother's belongings. It took almost a month and quite a bit of effort to get everything ready for the sale on my own. I didn't have to do that." Kit wiped his hands on his apron, as if the argument had made his hands sweat. If what you said was true, if I really didn't care for this house or the things in it, I would have just sold you the pie plates. Then sell me the fucking pie plates. Basie was entirely aware that Kit's logic was too sound to argue with. Even to his own ears, Basie's rationale sounded like the ravings of a madman, but his blood was boiling too much for him to care. That doesn't... Kit sighed. Please don't swear at me in my home. It's my... Basie snapped his lips shut. The back of his throat burned. Kit said nothing as Basie crossed the room and snatched a picture off the wall. He presented it to Kit, holding it where the frame splintered on the left side. In the photograph, Della was smearing a piece of pie against the mouth of 67-year-old Basie. His face was stained purple from blueberries and crust. "How much for this?" he demanded flatly, sarcastically. Kit looked down at the picture, then back up at Basie. "Oh, you're..." Kit said to him, to the man with blueberries staining his lips. "Basie, I... Enjoy my fucking house, pal." Basie spun on his heels and left.
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening and giving the book a try. If you liked it, you can find the whole thing just about anywhere, as well as in lots of libraries, maybe one near you. But you can also follow along with all the Long Lily stories and everything I've got cooking up in my little writer noggin on my Instagram page at tess.carletta and on my website, tesscarletta.com. Until then, we'll see you next time. Bye!